We have discovered this year that in the comparison of the Exodus and Advent people, the heavenly kingdom is indeed nigh. Now, I suppose that every boy and girl who has been exposed to the Bible is familiar with the story of Balaam and his donkey. Let's go straight to it as we begin by turning to Numbers, the 22nd chapter. Numbers 22, where we come to a conclusion concerning our study this year on the Exodus and Advent movements. Except for a wee look at Moses next Sabbath, this will be the finish of our study. We come up to the third time that the children of Israel approach the Promised Land. And we discover what happens as to why they finally go into the Promised Land. And why it is that we will finally go into the heavenly country. It isn't because several million people have become perfect. It is because the nations of the world have filled up their cup of iniquity. The harvest of the tares is ripe, as well as the harvest of the wheat. And God simply shakes out on the borders of the Promised Land those He cannot take in, and those who remain cross the Jordan and enter the Promised Land. This we learn from this study. In other words, we could title this in one sense, Here I Come, Ready or Not. I believe that Jesus is going to come very soon, whether we're ready or not. And those who are ready will cross the Jordan. Those who aren't ready will not. It's simply that simple. There has been almost a 2-year delay because of the second rejection of the chance to go into the Promised Land. And now the people come up for the third time, starting in verse 1 of Numbers 22. And the children of Israel set forward and pitched in the plains of Moab on this side Jordan by Jericho. And Balak, the son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Balak was king of the Moabites. And he was afraid. Why? Because the Amorites had conquered the Moabites. And it didn't take very long for Balak to figure out that if the Amorites had conquered the Moabites, and now the children of Israel had conquered the Amorites, that the Moabites were in big trouble. So he decided to do by strategy what he figured he couldn't do by combat. Verse 5. He sent messengers, therefore, unto Balaam, the son of Beor. And what did they say? Behold, there is a people come out from Egypt. Behold, they cover the face of the earth, and they abide over against me. Come now, therefore, I pray thee, curse me this people, for they are too mighty for me. Balak is interested in causing by hocus pocus what he couldn't cause by force of arms. Apparently Balaam, the one he sent the message to, had a pretty good reputation for cursing. Or he had a very effective curse or something. As you study the history of it, you discover that Balaam had once been a prophet of God, but he had gone into apostasy and trusted in himself. And God still had some ways of communicating with him, because the messengers arrived at Balaam's place with Balak's request that he come and curse Israel. And in verse 12, God said unto Balaam, Thou shalt not go with them. Thou shalt not curse the people, for they are blessed. So Balaam told this to the princes from Moab, and they went on their way. But Balak was not satisfied. So in verse 15 it says, Balak sent yet again princes more and more honorable than they. And Balaam was impressed with these VIPs. Plus he was impressed with their offer of reward. And so Balaam tried to work it out so he could go and curse Israel. But in spite of the fact that he invited the princes to wait overnight, and in spite of the fact that Balaam was hoping to be able to do the job, God said, go. If you're so intent on going, go ahead and go. Verse 20. But the word which I shall say unto thee, that shalt thou do. And Balaam rose up in the morning, saddled his ass, and went with the princes of Moab. Well, here's where the story gets rather exciting and rather interesting. Because as Balaam was riding toward the country of the Moabites on his donkey, the donkey began to balk. He wouldn't go. And Balaam tried to persuade him with all kinds of methods. And finally they came to a wall and a narrow opening through the wall, as you recall. And as Balaam tried to force the donkey through the opening, the donkey wouldn't go, and in the process, he smashed Balaam's foot against the side of the wall. Why wouldn't the donkey go? Because, as you know, the angel of the Lord was standing there with his sword drawn, and even a dumb donkey could see through that. His eyes were open. He was able to see into another dimension. He saw the angel of the Lord, which Balaam didn't. And so Balaam, in his fit of temper, began to beat on the donkey. And in verse 28, it says, And the Lord opened the mouth of the ass, and she said unto him, Balaam, what have I done unto thee, that thou hast smitten me these 3 times? Now at this point, Balaam should have been so surprised that he should have fallen off his donkey. But instead, he talked back to the donkey as though this was an everyday happening. Can you imagine that? How bent a man can be on his own desires and how irate he can be so he can dialogue with a donkey. And Balaam said unto the ass, Because thou hast mocked me, there were a sword in mine hand, for now would I kill thee. And the ass said unto Balaam, Am not I thine ass upon which thou hast ridden? Ever since I was thine unto this day, was I ever wont to do so unto thee? And he said, Nay. Strange things happening on the road to Moab. Verse 31, And the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand, and he bowed down his head and fell flat on his face. And the first thing that the angel did was to give him a reprimand for beating so unmercifully on a dumb animal. And then verse 34, Balaam said unto the angel, I have sinned, for I knew not that thou stoodest in the way against me. Now therefore, if it displease thee, I will get me back again. If it displease thee. Well, that was rather foolish, because he already had plenty of evidence about that question, didn't he? If it displease thee. But instead, the angel gave him the word, Go ahead and go, but you'll only be able to say the words that I put in your mouth. And right there, that was bad news for Balak and the Moabites, as you well know. Well, Balaam arrived at Balak's country. Balak was overjoyed because this man who's known for his good cursing was there. He took him up to a high place on one of the mountains of Baal, overlooking the camp of Israel, and stood by for Balaam to do his thing. Balaam opened his mouth chapter 23, verse 7. And he said, Balak the king of Moab hath brought me from Aram out of the mountains of the east, saying, Come curse me, Jacob, and come defy Israel. How shall I curse whom God hath not cursed? Or how shall I defy whom the Lord hath not defied? For from the top of the rocks I see him, and from the hills I behold him. Who can count the dust of Jacob and the number of the fourth part of Israel? Let me die the death of the righteous, and let my last end be like his. All Balaam could do was give good marks to God's people, the righteous, they're called. And he said, I'd like to die the death of these people. And Balak said unto Balaam, What hast thou done unto me? I took thee to curse mine enemies, and behold, thou hast blessed them. And Balaam answered, Must I not take heed to speak that which the Lord hath put in my mouth? Well, Balak wasn't satisfied. He thought perhaps we can do a better job than this. So he took Balaam up to the top of Mount Pisgah. And there he could only see part of the camp of Israel. Apparently, he was hoping that Balaam would not be so impressed or depressed by the great numbers of these people, and that maybe he could curse them piecemeal, a little bit at a time. And so he got him up to the top of Mount Pisgah and invited Balaam to curse them, or to try to curse them from there. We read verse 19 now, chapter 23. Balaam said, God is not a man that he should lie, neither the Son of Man that he should repent. Hath he said, and shall he not do it? Or hath he spoken, and shall he not make it good? Verse 21, God hath not beheld iniquity in Jacob, neither hath he seen perverseness in Israel. The Lord is God, is with him, and the shout of a king is among them. Verse 25, And Balak said unto Balaam, Neither curse them at all, nor bless them at all. In other words, stop trying to do either one. We'd better quit while we're still ahead. I'm not going to ask you to curse them again, but don't bless them. At least you can do that much. Keep from blessing them. But the more Balak thought about it, the more he thought that perhaps yet he could succeed in his attempts at having Israel cursed. And so they went through more mumbo-jumbo, more incantations, or whatever all they did. And they tried yet a third time. And this time, chapter 24, verse 5, you have Balaam's third curse. How goodly are thy tents, O Jacob, and thy tabernacles, O Israel. Verse 8, He shall eat up the nations, his enemies, and shall break their bones, and pierce them through with arrows. Verse 9, Blessed is he that blesseth thee, and cursed is he that curseth thee. And Balak's anger was kindled against Balaam, and he smote his hands together. And Balak said unto Balaam, I call thee to curse mine enemies, and behold, thou hast altogether blessed them these 3 times. Therefore now flee thou to thy place. Get out of here. Get out of my sight. And as Balaam leaves for home, he shouts over his shoulder one more blessing. You find it in the 17th verse. One of the blessings which some people consider one of the most beautiful prophecies and blessings. I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Sheth. Predictions of good things to come for Israel. Well, Balaam went home licking his wounds. He had one of the rewards and the honor that came from the king of the Moabites. But the whole project had gone sour. And Balaam went back and put in a few sleepless nights, apparently, staring at the ceiling. And according to the record, you find out that Balaam wasn't ready to give up. He came up with a bright idea. he sent word back to Balak. You tried to get me to curse Israel, he basically said. But no one can curse what God has blessed. And the reason that you cannot get Israel cursed is because they are close to God. And anyone who is living close to God is going to be blessed. Now, he said, if you will do something that will separate them from their God, you won't have to have them cursed. The curse will be automatic. Basically, that's what he said. And Balak was interested now. And he called Balaam in. Do you have any ideas of how we can separate them from their God? And Balaam did. Because the women of Moab were known as some of the most beautiful in all of the country, he suggested to Balak that they send some of the most beautiful of those women over to Mount Baal Peor and invite the children of Israel to a party. Now Balak was getting interested. And as you study the story as recorded in the book Patriarchs and Prophets, you discover that the plan was a huge success. Among the first to go to the party and to fraternize with the women of Moab were the leaders of Israel. And before the doings was over, 24,000 of them, including some of the greatest leaders, had become involved in the apostasy. And as Balaam and Balak succeeded in separating the people from God and leading them into sin, the curse was automatic. You know, we have something in the modern aspect that has happened to America. You know, for a long time, there was the threat of war and conquest on the part of communism. And then the communists got smart. If you've studied this at all, you know there's a great deal of truth to it. Communists said, we don't have to destroy America by force of arms. We will infiltrate from inside. And they have used some of the same methods that Balaam and Balak used. So that gradually America has been going down the tubes on the moral front. And the cursing in the end will be automatic. Perhaps you didn't know that communism was behind much of the pornography and all the rest that goes with it that has infiltrated our country. History repeats itself. Well, one of the interesting things about this whole arrangement is that Moses didn't see what was going on. Moses, who could be on the top of Mount Sinai and through the divine intervention look down with some sort of prophetic vision and could see the camp of Israel below involved in idolatry, Moses, who had access to the Urim and Thummim and direct guidance by God, somehow was unaware that 24,000 of his people had gone to the party at Mount Baal Peor. And this whole thing went on, apparently until the apostasy was of national proportions. And it makes you wonder where God is sometimes. I have seen people wonder where God was when it comes to modern Israel. I have heard people wonder if God was asleep at the switch when certain injustices came and certain problems arose within perhaps leadership or the management of the work of God today. Who's blind? Is God blind? But as we study the history of it, we discover that God is not blind. He simply has a different timetable than we do. Someone gave me a formula one time which has been of real value to me because of some of the questions I had. It's a formula called T over O, which has no algebraic sense to it at all. It's simply a way of saying that on God's time, in God's time, and on His occasion, He will set things straight. T over O. In God's time and on His occasion. And sometimes God's time and His occasion is different than my time and my occasion. And it leads to frustration. But if we are patient enough and have faith enough to let the water go under the bridge long enough, we discover that T over O is right. And one of the reasons that God allows things to happen is that it might encourage the shaking and the sifting that takes place just before we cross the Jordan. Today, God has allowed conditions to happen in such a way that people who have never been happy in the church can find an easy out. And people who have been disgruntled in the church, never really wanted to be there, can find a good excuse to leave today. And in the end, it becomes a blessing. It becomes a blessing. It is traumatic and it's hard when it's some of your friends. But T over O. There's another interesting thing that happens in this account in Israel. Evidently, a man by the name of Zimri came back from the party at Mount Bel Peor, bringing a prostitute by the name of Cosby with him. And right while the people of Israel, after the whole thing had been called to their attention, were on their knees weeping over the problem of Israel, Zimri comes walking through the camp, leading this young lady, and goes straight to his tent. Interesting things went on back there. And there was a son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron. His name was Phinehas, who saw this, and he was a man of action. He took his javelin, and he followed Zimri and Cosby into the tent, and he pinned them both to the ground with one thrust of his javelin. Now, I suppose that he could have followed a more indirect method of counseling. He could have knocked on the tent first and said, pardon me, Zimri, you seem to be having some problems. Does this go back to your childhood? Let's have a little discussion about it. Perhaps you'd like some counsel. No, he used a direct approach. Thunk. And he pinned them through to the ground in one thrust of his javelin. And we say, well, this, of course, is a rather hard way to go. And what would God think about that? Because, as some people are saying today, God never destroys anybody. You know what happened as a result of that? God gave instruction for Phinehas to be honored with the priesthood the rest of his life for his heroic act. Well, finally there on the banks of the Jordan River, the rebels were shaken out. And those who were not among the rebels crossed the Jordan and entered the promised land. According to Numbers 26, verses 64 and 65, as they counted Israel, they discovered that everyone who had left Egypt 20 years old and older were dead, except for two, Caleb and Joshua, and Moses, who was soon to go. And only Caleb and Joshua would cross the Jordan River. But it was the same movement that left Egypt that entered the promised land. Now let's take a look at the modern application of this bit of ancient history. The Advent movement pulled out of Babylon and headed toward the promised land. The people came along and laughed, and they said, "We thought that you were going to leave us." at the time of the great disappointment. We thought you were going to get on your ascension robes and go to heaven, but you're still here. And there have been attempts ever since the beginning of the Advent movement to curse that people. But we have discovered that much of the time, if not most of the time, cursing can be turned by God into blessing. In fact, it is a psychological principle that human nature is somewhat sympathetic with the underdog, really. There was a man by the name of Giovanni Papini who wrote about the devil, as you might recall. And his thesis was that we should stop being so hard on the devil, because when we're so hard on the devil, people began to sympathize with the devil. And it's sort of a reverse psychology, I suppose. I, as a kid, went to Michigan to listen to the public meetings of my preacher father and uncle as they held evangelistic meetings on the Sawdust Trail. And one town, Grand Rapids, Michigan, there was a preacher in his church that didn't like the sound of these public meetings that were coming to town, so he got up and he warned his members that if any of them were going to go to these meetings, they would be disfellowshipped automatically from his church. As a result, there were a large number of these people on the front row of the meetings the opening night. They told about it later. I can remember at a camp meeting in the Northwest where there were some leaders of our church who were afraid of offshoots, an offshoot material that was being circulated or that people had received in the mail. So they got up in front and they said, look, this material from these people is dangerous. Don't read it. Go home and burn it. And I know of people that went home and took it out of their garbage cans and read it as a result of these warnings. You pass the sign that says, please don't read the other side of this sign, and you turn your head and you read the other side of that sign. People who are trying to cause someone to turn away from something usually force them to go and investigate it. Isn't that true? Isn't that the way we operate? Today we have evidence that the enemy has tried to curse. We have public press. We have people who are weeping over the bad press. And I would like to say, let's stop weeping. I have a remarkable little statement here recorded in the book Mount of Blessing you might be interested in. Page 33. Foes can do nothing against truth, but for truth. God means that truth shall be brought to the front and become the subject of examination and discussion, even through the contempt placed upon it. The minds of the people must be agitated. Every controversy, every reproach is God's means of awakening minds that otherwise might slumber. Very interesting. Bad publicity is still publicity. And the truth is that no one can curse what God has blessed. But the devil is angry. And if he cannot accomplish his means by cursing, then he will reverse his tactics and cause it by other means. For instance, he will send the women from Moab to accomplish the same thing. What does a woman represent in Bible prophecy? Anyone remember? A church. The false churches of the land of Canaan, Babylon, can become friendly. And we can become friendly with them. And he can accomplish the same purpose. We have plenty of evidence of that. And whether it's literal or whether it's figurative, the aftermath of Mount Belpeor can still be seen in the world and in the church today. And then we come to this rather interesting comment concerning the church at the end. The church may appear as about to fall, but it does not fall. It remains while the sinners in Zion will be sifted out. The chaff separated from the precious wheat. This is a terrible ordeal, but nevertheless it must take place. None but those who have been overcoming by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony will be found with the loyal and true, without spot or stain of sin, nor guile in their mouths. SM 2, 380. The church may appear as about to fall, but it does not fall. Instead, at the very end, before the crossing of Jordan, there is a shaking time, and rebels leave, and those who have no faith leave, and those who do not trust God leave. As the storm approaches, a large class who have professed faith in the third angel's message, but have not been sanctified through it, abandon their position and join the ranks of the opposition. By uniting with the world and partaking of its spirit, they have come to view matters in nearly the same light, and when the test is brought, they are prepared to choose the easy, popular side. Great Controversy 608. The other night I was sitting in the meetings over at Piedmont Park with evangelists speaking. It was a powerful meeting, and a call was made, one of the best legitimate calls I've ever seen. And as I sat there, I was thinking about the scores and scores of people who may come to church on Sabbath for whatever reason, but who never come to any other meetings. And it really brought a bit of heartache. Where are our interests? Honestly, where are our interests? Are we going to change and become that much more interested when the smoke is rising? Or will we fade away? I'm not sure that I want to join Phinehas with his javelin. But I would like to appeal to you, my friend, to be sure that God is top priority in your life, and that you will be among those who will cross the Jordan. Because God is desperately concerned, trying to see how many people He can get into heaven. He's not trying to see how many He can keep out. Aren't you thankful for that? And the choice is up to us.
You have been listening to another special American Christian Ministries presentation. This recording has been digitally reprocessed from the original audio cassette or reel-to-reel in order to make this CD available. The audio quality was improved as much as possible. International copyright, American Christian Ministries. All rights reserved. To order a copy of this or other presentations, or for a free catalog, please call toll-free 800-233-4450. International calls dial 717-652-7000. You may also order from our secure website at www.americanchristianministries.org. There you will discover the largest selection of authentic Adventist preaching available. If American Christian Ministries has been a blessing to you, why not take a moment just now and send us a note or an email with your testimony? We'll share it with our speakers and volunteer workers to encourage them. Your prayers and continued financial support are very important to ensure the continuation of this ministry as we help prepare America and the world to meet Jesus Christ. He's coming soon.